good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope you are all well. Well, when I ask everyone what their May birthdays were, we have quite the list. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and do the birthday shout-outs. If you don't wish to listen to this segment of the intro, you can go ahead and skip to the first story. But I like to do this for the listeners and supporters that appreciate a birthday shout-out. Here we go. Starting with all May birthdays. And please forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's name. I will do my best. Here we go. Andele's wife, 2nd. Brody Wardwell, 2nd. Mark's son, the 3rd. Cornelius, the 3rd. Nutty Nelly, 3rd. Manny Cisneros, 4th. Cam, the 7th. Kayla FJ, the 8th. Bonnie Guse, the 8th. Michael Keltner, he's going to be 1 year old on the 10th. Happy birthday, little buddy. NTLIGNTBLND, the 11th. Hayden Nix, the 14th. Jody Johnson, 15th. Heather Pursilver, the 18th. Julian Lampard's boyfriend, Sal, 19th. The Psychedelic Cinema, the 19th. Wyatt Marshall, 22nd. Angela Dixon, the 22nd. Nani, the 24th. Jennifer Luamala, the 27th. This Chiquita, 29th. Allison Brody, the 30th. Janice, 30th. Manuel Juarez, 31st. Happy birthday to each and every one of you, and I hope it will be the best. Thank you so much for letting me know your birthday, and I hope you've enjoyed this shout out. Down below in the description, if you are enjoying what you are listening to, you can find the Buy Me a Coffee link. And if you do feel so inclined to, you can buy me a coffee, as it does help support me and the Back to Ashes channel. As well, if you would like to become a member, membership start at $1.99 a month and up, depending on what tier you choose. That can also be found in the description below. Now, with all of that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and happier person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and enjoy this dose of vocal melatonin entitled A Creepy Throng of Scary Stories. All out of side notes, some of you do not like the fiction stories that I tell. Remember, this is a filler, as I'm in the background hunting down more true stories to bring your way. As soon as this intro is done, an ad will play. I'll read the first story, another ad will play, and there will be no more ads for the rest of the video. Enjoy. Strange symbols. All right. Here's another creepy story that happened to me while driving a cab in New York City. It was a cold winter night, and I was driving through a quiet neighborhood in Queens. I picked up a young woman who wanted to go to a small park on the outskirts of the city. She was quiet and didn't say much, so I assumed she was tired or had a long day. As we were driving, I noticed that the streets were getting darker and more deserted. We were getting further away from the city, and the roads were starting to look unfamiliar. I asked the woman if she was sure this was where she wanted to go, but she just nodded her head and didn't say anything. When we finally arrived at the park, I pulled up to the entrance, and the woman got out. She gave me a strange look and walked into the darkness of the park without saying a word. I waited in the car for a few minutes, but the woman didn't come back. I started to get worried, so I got out of the car and walked into the park to look for her. As I walked deeper into the park, I noticed that something was off. It was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt heavy with a sense of dread. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes, and I turned around to see the woman standing there, staring at me with a blank expression. I tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared at me with those dead eyes. That's when I noticed something else. There were strange symbols drawn on her skin, and she was wearing a necklace made of bones. I realized then that something was seriously wrong, and I needed to get out of there as fast as possible. I ran back to my car and sped away from the park as fast as I could. To this day, I don't know what happened in that park or what the symbols meant. All I know is that it was one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had driving a cab in New York City. When the lights go out. The doctor, one of the newer plastic surgeons at Kashmir Hospital, looked a little sheepish as he approached my desk. I'd only seen him a few times, and he had ever spoken to me directly. He was a vain fellow in the same vein as a few of the other hotshot docs around the ER. But today, he looked rattled. His hair was unkempt, his clothing looked dirty, and he was glancing around in that way that made me think he might be being followed. "Are you the one who collects the stories?" he asked. I look around, not sure if he was hiding from someone, before telling him that I was. "Carl said you would understand. I don't know what happened to me, but he told me that you might be able to help me make sense of it. I know you're at work, but do you have a minute to talk?" It was currently about 10 o'clock, and I was in the middle of a lull in activity. The real work wouldn't be possible until after they called for visitors to leave. So I pushed out a chair and pulled out a notepad. I had started carrying it religiously, the stories becoming habitual, and I wanted to get all the information while it was fresh. His name was Dr. Gary Long, and he had experienced something I had only heard once before. The more he talked, the more I realized he was talking about the creatures that had taken up residence in the Forbidden Corridor, over in the East Wing, Record Mezzanine. I've only been working at Kashmir Hospital for a couple of months, but I had heard all the rumors. Dr. Logan still tells people about what happened to him in the elevator. People talk about the ghost girl in the South Wing that jumps from the 5th-story balcony. And everyone, nurses and doctors alike, knows that if you stay in the OR too late, you might run into Shaky Leg Mary. I listened, but I privately thought they were nothing but stories. It was just talk. Every hospital has them. But Kashmir Hospital has a bit of a reputation. Even in med school, the students knew about the weirdness that surrounds the hospital. And when my friends heard I had accepted an offer to work there, they joked that I was going to get taken away by some ghost one night. Ghosts don't do what this thing did. It was late when I got done with my case. I had dressed out and was leaving to get my car from the garage. This may sound silly, but I always park my car at the bottom of the car park. It's a 2021 Mercedes that I'm still likely to be paying off when I'm 40. But doctors are expected to maintain a certain air of affluence. Fancy watches, big houses, shining cars. It all gives off the illusion of wealth, while most of us are drowning in student loans and credit card debt. The car was a frivolity that I couldn't really afford, but I was trying and mostly succeeding at keeping my head above water. So, when I took the elevator down to the 5th floor basement of the car park and found nothing but empty spots, I was shocked. I had parked it in the 3rd spot on the left side, and now it was gone. There were no other cars down there either, so I could only assume that someone had either stolen it or it had been towed for some reason. I was grumbling when I climbed back into the elevator, but I felt confident that this could be solved in short order. If it had been stolen, then my insurance would get me a rental car until the police found it. The car was insured for quite a lot, and I had little doubt that the premiums would buy me another one if it had been taken. If the hospital had my car towed, then they would get me a rental car or get the impound lot to bring my damn car back. When the elevator didn't move after I jabbed the button, my anger flared. I slapped at the buttons, but nothing happened. I picked up the phone and tried to call the switchboard, but there was no tone. The doors didn't close either, which didn't seem weird until I thought about it. They just stayed open, and I finally threw the phone at the bank of lit buttons and decided to walk out of the garage and find someone to yell at. It had been a long day. I was tired, and all this bullshit was really starting to make me mad. I started walking towards the ramp then, and if I'd known what would happen later, I think I have just stayed in the elevator. The next floor up was empty too, and I wondered how long it was before my watch told me it was barely 9. Most of the other employees were probably just lazy and didn't want to drive all the way back up. They didn't care if people dinged their cars, and I figured I would see more cars as I went up. It was comfortable enough down there, the concrete box creating a cave of sorts, and the fluorescence overhead hummed with insectile good cheer. Other than the hum, my footfalls seemed to be the only noise. The constant talk, talk, talk of my sneakers was monotonous, but it was also a little nice to know I hadn't just gone deaf. There really wasn't any other sound down there, and as I came to the 3rd floor, I was surprised that there still wasn't a window to the outside. The first 2 levels I had come through were basements, but surely this one should be on the ground level, right? This floor was when I started to notice the plants as well. There were palmettos, I think, and they sprouted up from the concrete in places. The fronds looked pretty pokey, and I really didn't want to touch them and find out. I wondered why maintenance or groundskeeping hadn't done something about them, but it was really none of my business. They were in the corners or out of the way, and they weren't hurting anything. The Georgia flora had always been a bit invasive sometimes, and seeing plants in a man-made structure wasn't anything uncommon. That was the first time I felt something watching me too. The first time I heard something other than the lights humming or the scuff of my shoes. I was coming up the ramp and onto the 2nd floor when I heard something scrub against the concrete. It was a low sound like fingernails, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The concrete parking structure was still empty, and it was becoming odd that I hadn't seen any cars or people. A dozen other nurses and techs had been in the surgery with me, and to have seen absolutely none of their vehicles was strange. I was coming to the levels just beneath the entrance ramp. Why hadn't I seen someone? As the phantom eyes bore a hole between my shoulder blades, I picked up the pace. I wanted to be out of here, and my anger was beginning to subside as the creeping chill of fear sent icy fingers through it. The next floor should have definitely been on ground level, but it was the same bland box that the others had been. There were no cars, no people, but the plants had gotten thicker. They were looking more like jungle plants now, and the cool cave was becoming a little humid. I saw vines hanging from the ceiling, and they seemed to be coming right out of the concrete. Why hadn't I ever noticed any of this before? Its presence did little to soothe me, and when I heard a crunch from behind me, I quickened my pace again. I could still hear that low noise behind me. I wasn't alone as I thought. I felt like something was stalking me, and as I ran up the next ramp, I almost cried out when it was more of the same. The plants were getting thicker, and the concrete seemed to be giving way to dirt in places. I was running now, my feet carrying me onward as my brain began to scream at me that we were trapped. I stumbled, but I caught myself before I fell and glanced back to make sure nothing was chasing me. I don't know how, but I knew that if I fell, that would be the end of me. I had gone higher than the parking deck could possibly be, 5 floors higher than the roof, when the lights suddenly went out. I don't mean the lights flickered. I don't mean they just sort of dimmed. I mean that suddenly, I was something akin to blind. As I stood still in the blackness, I could hear them again. They sounded like animals, walking around on all fours as their claws scraped against the ground. I had thought there was only one, but the longer I listened, the more I thought it might be 2, or 3, or as many as 6. They were searching for me, stalking me through the murk, and I didn't dare move. Something in the instinctual part of my brain told me that, if I moved, they would know where I was. It told me to stand as still as I could and not make a sound as they hunted for me. They searched, they sniffed, but eventually, I heard them moving away, and that was when I made my escape. I ran like my life depended on it, and maybe it did. They heard me sooner than I would have thought, and I tore off in the general direction of the next ramp. The layout of the parking structure was pretty uniform, and I knew that if I just kept moving in a circle, I could get to the next floor. Something in me screamed that if I could get out of here, that if I could get free of whatever loop I was in, I could lose these creatures and be done with this madness. Their claws sounded huge as they ate up the ground. They made little huffing noises as they ran, and I couldn't imagine what they must look like. I think I settled on a pack of panthers that had come to get me, and when I suddenly ran into a concrete wall, I just knew they were about to rip me to shreds. It turned out to be for the best, however. As I lay there trying to see if my nose was broken, something hit the wall I had ran into with a loud and angry yowl. It hit it hard enough to send concrete chips cascading over me, and I put a hand over my mouth as I lay completely silent on the dusty concrete. It picked itself up and shook off whatever damage the wall had done to it before snuffing the air souply. It was looking for me, and I did not want to be found. I could feel its bulk as it came close, smell the rancid meat that must lay beneath those claws, and I hoped that it couldn't hear me trembling. I expected that every breath would be my last, and the thought that I would die as I took a shallow, half breaths, which was depressing. Some indeterminable amount of time later, the creature moved away, and I got up as quickly as I could and tiptoed for the wall. I had misjudged the circle I was making, and when I found the edge, I headed up the ramp and kept climbing. Something was different now. I could feel it, and when my light-deprived eyes began to adjust to the intrusion of light, I knew I was getting close to the surface. As my hope came back, I started running again, and that's when I heard them behind me. I came up and I saw the crossbar and little booth that told me the front of the parking deck was in sight. I put on a burst of speed, and when I ducked under the arm, I heard something's claws rake against the wood. I fell onto the asphalt and looked back in time to see a solid, black creature with a head like a spade. Its body looked like it was covered in scales instead of fur, and teeth that hung from that mouth looked painfully large. It had no eyes, but it pointed its spade-shaped head in my direction and seemed to know where I was. Despite the small burn of the moon and the distant islands of the security lights, the creature was still unwilling to come out and get me. It slunk back into the parking structure, and I sighed in relief. I screamed in surprise when I heard footsteps coming towards me, but it was just Carl. He had been smoking by the parking deck, and when he heard me running out, he came to investigate. I told him about the creatures, and he only shrugged like this was just one more thing on his plate. He offered to go get my car for me, and when I asked him if he wasn't afraid of the things down there, he said it was nothing new. Stuff like that happens all the time, he said, and told me to go wait for him in the front lobby. There's a guy there who I think you want to talk to. I have a feeling he knows just what you're talking about. The Mercedes in question came rolling up about that point, and Dr. Long seemed relieved. I finished my notes, but I could feel him staring in much the way he had described the creature staring at him. So, have you ever heard of anything like that before? Yeah, it's not my first time. If it happens again, just stay in the elevator until it stops. The hospital's like a strange kind of waiting room all on its own. Sometimes you slip into places that you aren't prepared for, and it's best to just wait it out until reality reasserts itself. I don't think I'll be parking in that structure again. I'll take my chances in staff parking. A few dings on the door is a small price to pay for peace of mind. He thanked me before leaving, and I transcribed his notes into the PDF I was keeping for the weird things that happened around here. Eventually, we all slip into that strange other room just beyond the waiting room, and if you're lucky, you get to slip back out again too. Dr. Long was lucky, but he may not get so lucky a second time. My reflection is dead, but left me a message. Blog post number 1. My reflection is dead. Dear listener, I have seen death. No. This isn't clickbait. For once, I'm at a loss for words. This morning I woke up. Nothing funny there, and I don't like to start my posts with it, but it's the only normal thing that happened. And I went into the bathroom to get ready for the day. I was twiddling with the end of my hair, still contained in a sleep braid to keep my curls within reason. I already had toothpaste on the toothbrush and lifted it to my mouth when I noticed I had no reflection. At first, I thought it might be some sort of prank. Last month, that was all the rage, and I know I pranked quite a few people myself. I have no idea how someone would get a reflection not to reflect. If you do, maybe shoot me a DM. Anyway, back on point. I'm feeling a bit scattered by all of this. Everything else in the mirror was reflecting correctly. Even the toothbrush showed up as I lifted it up. Thinking something might be wrong with the mirror, I picked up my hand mirror and focused it on my face. Nothing. No matter how I twisted or turned the angle I stood in, I couldn't catch my reflection at all. I always like to see myself in the morning. Pretty certain that's normal, but somehow not being able to view my reflection made it truly desperate that I get a glimpse. I'm sure you remember from the post that I posted last month that I had those full-length mirrors installed in the living room so I could focus on my dancing form better. This morning, I decided to skip the toothbrushing, and I hurried out to give my dancer's mirrors another use, giving me peace of mind. I was hoping to see my reflection there. Maybe I should have hoped more carefully, because while I saw my reflection, it wasn't exactly soothing. What I actually saw was my reflection laying dead on the floor. Not proud of it, but I kind of froze at that point, just staring. Did this mean that I was dead? Maybe I was a ghost and just didn't know it yet, wandering around my house, but without a physical body. I couldn't reflect. And the me lying on the floor was obviously dead. Pasty pale skin, limbs stiff, eyes glazed and mouth white. Seeing myself dead was a very surreal sort of thing and not a heartening experience. But I feel real and alive. Just to reassure myself, I pressed a finger to my neck and there was a pulse. My mouth tasted sort of bitter and swampy. You know, like I'd skipped brushing my teeth that morning. I pinched my arm and the bite of my nails hurt. There weren't a lot of facts about ghosts to check against, but I didn't think I fit the bill. Let me know if you have any pertinent facts. My first reaction was to run out of the house, but something about my dead reflection called to me. In the reflection, I was wearing my pajamas and my hair was still in my sleep braid. Pretty much exactly as I looked physically in real life, except my reflection was holding this scrap of paper with neat black writing on it. Her dead fingers were clamped tightly on the paper. I recognized the handwriting as my own and moved closer, trying to get a peek at what mirror me had written. No matter how I turned or twisted or adjusted the light, I couldn't make it out. And I didn't really have time to figure it out. It's a work day after all, though. I'm not sure what the precedent for skipping work after seeing your dead reflection is, but I know my boss wouldn't like it. More on this later. I'm off to work. But I feel like there's something on that paper that I need to discover. Something important. Blog post number 2. Following the clues. Dear listener. Okay, back for another entry. 2 posts a day won't become my normal, but just this once it seems justified. My reflection wasn't in any of the mirrors at work or on any reflective surfaces. I thought I could power through and just have a normal day, but that didn't work. I hadn't even gotten around to answering all of your comments. I'm sorry about that. I was just too weird seeing myself absent from the windows I walked by and the bathroom mirrors. I haven't been able to focus on anything else. So, I bowed out of work, sick. Everyone believed me. I must look a fright. Nothing like I can tell since I can't see myself, but no, I'm not posting any pictures. I'm a little afraid I won't show up there either, so I'm not looking. Not being able to see myself is just awful, though. Except, that's a lie. I can see myself. Just, I can only do that in the one reflection in the dancer's mirrors in the living room. I'm glancing over at her now. She's still in her pajamas and sleep braid, and the paper is still clutched in her hand. I admit that by the time I bailed on work and saw all of your curious comments from this morning's post, I was committed to reading what that paper said. but no matter what I tried, I couldn't make it out. I even attempted bringing in a magnifying glass, but that reflected in the mirror and blocked the paper entirely. That attempt failed, and without some sort of aid, the angle was just too bad and the words too distant. Luck was on my side. Was it? I mean, if luck was really on my side, none of this would be happening. And when I went to go get some fresh air, my hair blew up in my face, tickling my nose and cheeks. I had an idea. Despite what some of the trolls on this page think, I do have those on occasion. The wind was really kicking outside, and if that was true here, maybe it was true for my reflection's reality. After all, anything else from the room I was in was still reflecting properly. Once I was back inside the house, I opened the window and let the window rustle the paper in my reflection's hand. The first attempt didn't really help. The second attempt knocked the paper loose just a little, freeing one corner of the paper to rustle and wave as the gusts of air hit. After a few tries of opening and closing the window, I got the note into a position that was readable. I had to squint, but I made out the text. I'm almost afraid to record what it said here. I think I'm going to sleep on it. Blog number 3. The message on the paper. Dear listener, stop with the comments, please. Some things are serious. I've already called in sick to work, and honestly, I almost didn't sit down here to write. A lot of you have commented about the note in yesterday's posts. I'm not sure how to feel about what you were saying. I'm a little insulted, honestly. This isn't some goofy prank. I'm attaching a picture. Turns out I do show up on camera. I try to get my reflection in the shot. You can kind of see her there in the corner, lying on the carpet. See? You can see that, right? Once I took the picture, I threw a blanket over the spot where my reflection was lying. I hoped it would cover her up on the side. She looks more and more dead by the hour, and my attempt with the blanket didn't do much. It appeared underneath her on the reflection. Maybe because of this side she isn't here. I can't manipulate her directly. I lit a candle and said a little prayer, but that felt off. Like, who am I mourning exactly? She's me, and I'm her. There really isn't a clear way to proceed at this point. Whatever else is true, people seem interested in the note, and I can't stop going over the words. So I decided to share a little more. I need to share something. My head is spinning, and I feel oddly alone. You don't think of your reflections as being a part of you or as being a friend, but I think she was. I miss her. The note in my reflection's hand said, I apologize for the shock. The end of your plane of existence is near, but you can save yourself by traversing to my side of the reflection. I thought long and hard about how to save you, and I could find no perfect option. As we can't coexist in the same place at the same time, I killed myself for you. To have a chance to live. I'm also giving you instructions on how to trespass between planes through the mirror when the time arrives. You will know when that moment has come. Wish you a long and happy life. I love you. That's it, or that isn't it. There's quite a bit more, but I'm not sharing anything beyond that. She did leave instructions, but I feel weird sharing them. Somehow I know that they were only meant for me to see. Giving you access is a trespass that feels unforgivable. However, I do feel I owe my readers something. The instructions are strange and very specific. Not the sort of instructions I ever would have deemed necessary to cross planes. I know that I couldn't have made them up. This is the second day of no reflections, and I admit it's affecting my head. I can't really tell anyone but you, since I'd probably just be bundled off into a straitjacket. I'm trying to laugh it off and hoping that tomorrow, when I wake up, everything will be back to normal. Maybe I'll be able to forget about all of this, like it was a bad dream. But nothing feels right. My own dead face stares back at me. Blog post number 4. Do you feel it? Dear listener, I realize it has been days and I haven't written, but, well, this blog seems kind of pointless, and I have been reading your often nasty comments. No, this is still not a joke, and no, I have not lost my mind. I have never been more certain of something. I wish there was a way I could make you see how serious this is. It is a shock that all of you can't feel the dark aura wafting over the world. The air feels different. Everything feels different. The end is upon us. I feel it in the air, moving on the wind, and the hollow sound of people's voices. No one else seems to notice. They just go on with their lives, completely oblivious to the ominous shadows that are slowly but surely embracing the world. Certainly, your comments don't reflect any sort of awareness. Reflect. How odd to use that word so casually. Before now, I never pondered reflections much at all, but now, I think often of what a reflection is and of what it would mean to live in a world of reflected objects. Is the light different there? Is there sound? Smell? If I'm going to live there, I suppose I'll find out. But it is worrisome not knowing. What happens in the reflection's plane of existence when the reflection isn't in use? Do they act on their own or just wait for us? If I'm a reflection, but I no longer exist in this plane of existence, what does that mean? Finding out is both exciting and terrifying. This is similar to what I always imagine a bride felt like on her wedding day. I'm never getting married now. Will I? Maybe that happens where I'm going to. I don't know. But these nerves are spot on to what I imagined, which makes me think something good is waiting for me. A new life is going to start. I must leave this plane of existence. I've gone over my reflections' instructions for gaining access to an alternate plane again and again. I know the way, and I'm prepared to follow each step. I really don't know why I haven't already. Even typing this feels hollow and empty. I guess I just want to wish my friends and family good luck. I want to see if any of you out there reading this have the same experience. Maybe I can hope to meet some of you on the other side. I really don't know what will happen to those left behind, to those who can't feel the doom in the air. I'm afraid to go alone. That's the truth. Yet the body in the mirror is rotting now, like mold patches mar my face. I feel I owe it to my reflection to help her somehow, but I'm afraid. What is on that side? Doom is all that remains here, but what awaits me there? There is something about the unknown that is terrifying. that humanity was hidden from for its entire existence. We like to understand, but sometimes understanding is not in the cards. Sometimes we need to have faith. Blog post number 5. Peace. Dear listener, all doubt has fled. I am on the only path possible for me to take. Even reading your comments now leaves me with a slow, sad feeling, as if even in the impersonal medium of the internet, I can feel the clouds swooping in and drowning out the edges of this plane of existence. You mean nothing, or you mean everything, but that version of everything is fading. This will be my last blog post. I apologize, but your comments will go unread. This is the last time I will sit at this computer and reach out the electronic void. A new home will welcome me soon. I am certain that place, serenity and beauty, awaits me. I hope you all find peace in whatever is coming. Farewell. Farewell, and may we meet again on the other side. The Exorcism in Eksjö, Sweden, Part 1. In a small village called Eksjö, something terrible was about to happen, and lives will be lost. Get out of her, I said. I compel you back to the hell, demon. But the priest was thrown across the room by the little girl, who seemingly was possessed by the demon he speaks of. The Alpar girl, Anna had to face these evil forces all on her own. Suddenly, a fire erupts from somewhere in the basement, and Anna had to quickly take the child with her. She carried Eleanor, the child, and dragged Father David out of there before it was too late, which she managed somehow. But there was a fourth person in the house, the child's mother. Okay, let me back up a bit. You now have some context. Let's begin to dive into this thrilling story, shall we? The trial, the supernatural, or murder? So, Anna, what really happened in that house? That's the accuser speaking. Anna was taken into custody for the murder of Vendala Lindgren, the mother of 2 that died in the fire. They believe that Anna was the cause of her death by pushing her into the burning flames. I told you already. The demon killed her. The demon that possessed Eleanor came after her when we drove it out. She jumped into the fire by choice to save us, she exclaims. There are no such thing as demons, Anna. I know you had a rough childhood, but that doesn't mean you can go around destroying other people's families. Thank you, Your Honor. Where it all began. Anna is a 15-year-old girl who dropped out of school because she had no money, because her family had abandoned her at an early age, so she was swinging back and forth in and out of foster care, which she thought was horrible. This left her with very little to no friends. But she had one friend on her side, Fadi. She lived with him and his family, but they were moving and Anna had nowhere to go. What was to happen to her now? On the kitchen counter lay some old magazines along with today's newspaper. Anna walked over to check the news because she had nothing better to do at that moment. Fadi's family was working and he himself had just passed her heading to his English class. But just then, she spots something in the newspaper that caught her attention. Looking for an RPAR that's fond of kids and isn't afraid to get their hands dirty every once in a while. If you can cook, that would be meriting as well. Me and my husband both have very demanding careers and can use an extra set of hands for some money and housing. Please email me your resume and I'll be sure to give you a call. Anna's face lit up with excitement. You can see the hope in her eyes as she proceeds to email. The next day. It's 9 o'clock in the morning and Anna is still sound asleep. Foddy tried to wake her up, but she slept like a baby. Eventually, he gave up and started getting ready for school. He won't be back until 7 since it's Thursday. He has band practice after class. Dang it. That's Anna. She abruptly woke up from her beauty sleep, but not because she wanted to. Instead, the phone had started ringing and vibrating so loudly that she got startled and almost fell out of bed. She looks over to the phone. It's a number she didn't recognize, but proceeds to answer. Hello, this is Anna West. Who am I speaking to? Hi, Anna. I'm Belinda Lundgren. I want to talk about your application for the job. Could you possibly come to meet me and my family today for an interview? I know it's short notice, so I completely understand if you can't make it. Anna thinks about it for a hot minute. She doesn't have any other option, so she agrees to meet Vendella and her family. They decided to meet around lunchtime. Vendella sent her the address and she was fit for fight. Their house is massive. It's a 3-story house if you include the basement, that is. Anna takes a deep breath, admiring the view for a brief moment before she starts heading in the direction of the front door. She knocks and was almost immediately greeted by Vendella. She was a woman in her 30s. She had emerald green eyes and a chestnut-colored hair that was neatly tucked into a ponytail. A few moments later, her husband came to greet Anna as well. All three of them sat down in the living room, going over the practical things and what their expectations of Anna is if she gets the job. After about an hour of talking, Vendella and her husband, Mark, needed to make a decision together in private. So they gestured Anna to go down to the playroom in the basement to spend some time with their kids, Eleanor and Jonas. So she does. Why do they have a playroom in the basement? You may be asking right now. I too thought it was creepy as hell. Well, it's because Vendella and Mark are trying to limit the children's screen time as much as they can. That's why. Down in the basement, Eleanor played with a stuffed animal, a big teddy bear. This teddy bear will be important later on. And Jonas is building a fort out of books and some furniture. They both lift their heads up and greet Anna. Eleanor calls her over and says, "You got the job. Congrats." Anna gets confused and asks Eleanor how she knows that she got the job, but her only answer was that, "The man in the closet told me. He doesn't like you very much." This made Anna feel a little unnerved, but didn't think much of it at that point in time. I mean, the parents were 2 stories up. How could she possibly hear them talking? She was trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they told her before I even got here? Who knows, Anna thought. A few moments later, the door to the playroom opens. It's Vendella. "Are you guys having fun down there?" she proceeds to say. The three of them nod and let out a small, "Mm-hmm." Then she goes, Anna, can I speak to you for a minute? Vendela and Anna go up the stairs and into the living room. Mark was already there waiting. Both of them takes a seat on the couch across from each other. So, Anna, what do you think? Do you like the kids? Can you picture yourself working here? Living with us? Anna does. She answered them. Yes, I like them a lot, and you two seem really nice as far as we've known each other. Mark and Vendela faced one another and then nodded in agreement. Anna, Vendela is the one talking. If you want this job, you can start right away. I've gotten a real good impression of you, so what do you say, Mrs. West? Anna's eyes starts to tear up. She's so happy. Yes, I would love to. I'd like to start right away. I'll tell my boyfriend that he can drop all of my belongings later. It's not that much, really, just some clothes and such. And so it all began. A seemingly innocent story with hope, a new beginning and a bright future. Oh, Anna. She has no clue what's coming for her and the Vendela's family. The darkness that lies within the walls of the house only goes stronger every day. To find out what happens next, stick around for part 2. It only goes darker by each part. Trust me. Part 2, The Exorcism in Eksjö, Sweden. Let's begin where we left off, shall we? Fadi, Anna's boyfriend, was just leaving after dropping off her belongings. I'm going to miss you, Anna, he said, giving her a long hug. After a while, he let go of her and waves one last goodbye to everyone before jumping up on his bike to then disappear, quickly down the block and out of sight. Anna closed the door slowly. She stands there for a moment, in front of the door in the hallway, trying to process it all. It happened so fast. In one day she had found a job, moved out of Fadi's parents' house, to a life with some strangers she knew close to nothing about. What did I get myself into? Anna mumbles under her breath, but she quickly regains her focus when Vendela calls her over. Dinner's ready, Anna. Come and take a seat. She does and joins the family for dinner. They ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing. They seemed to get along quite well, which was a big relief for Anna and Mr. and Mrs. Lindgren. It had gotten fairly late and the kids now had to be tucked into bed. Anna offered to put the kids to sleep so Vendela and Mark could get some privacy for once in their otherwise hectic life. Eleanor, Jonas, and Anna walked up the stairs to the children's shared bedroom at the end of the hallway. She neatly tucked them in and fluffed their pillows. All right, kids, she says. Do you want me to tell you a bedtime story before we all go to bed? Both of them nodded in agreement, excited to hear the story. Anna decides to tell them about Sleeping Beauty, how she was cursed with a magic spell that would make her fall asleep forever if she touched the spin row before her 16th birthday. And if that ever were to happen, only the people who loved her could save her. The kids were now sound asleep, so Anna quietly snuck out of their bedroom to her room across from theirs. She was pretty beat. It had been a long day, and she fell asleep almost immediately. The first signs of darkness. Anna abruptly wakes up. She hears something, but she can't make out where the noises were coming from. A loud thud echoes through the hallway. Now she was certain where the noises came from. They came from the children's bedroom. Maybe one of them fell out of the bed or just woke up, Anna thinks to herself. Well, in either of those cases, she needed to make sure that both of them were okay. So she gets out of bed and starts heading in the direction of the room. Inside, it's pitch black. And at first, she couldn't see shit. But after a few moments, when her eyes had adjusted itself to the darkness, she was able to make out the scenery of the room, sort of. The first thing she noticed was that the closet door was creaked open a bit. Strange. I'm pretty sure I closed it before heading to my room, she thinks, and raises her eyebrows in confusion, ever so slightly in surprise. But wait, there's something on the floor. She proceeds to head further into the room and get a closer look. It's Eleanor, sitting on the floor with her teddy bear, which now lacked some of its limbs, so to say. More specifically, the bear's head. Eleanor, what are you doing? What happened to Mr. Bear? She doesn't answer. She just stares back at Anna, smiling an unnerving smile that stretches from ear to ear. Eleanor, what are you doing? Now, Eleanor is starting to crawl toward Anna. You should stop snooping around, Anna West. The man in the closet would not be happy with you. Go back to bed now, and I will do the same. She stops crawling. Be careful. He's got an eye on you. Anna stands still, frozen in place. What was that all about? What man in the closet? And what is she talking about? That does not sound like a 5-year-old speaking. Anna has no idea what just happened, but she figured she would make sure that Eleanor went back to bed and deal with this in the morning. First thing tomorrow, she immediately tells Vendella what happened last night. Vendella starts to panic. She was gasping for air, not knowing what to do. It can't be. Can it really? After all those years? No. She mumbles to herself while walking around the kitchen back and forth over and over again. I had no idea what she's talking about. The day after that, Vendella installed a camera system that was recording whenever it heard or saw any movement. She looked terrified. Every night looks the same now. Eleanor screaming, throwing things around, and she even tried to suffocate her brother, for Christ's sake. What is Vendella hiding? And what is happening to Eleanor? The broken mirror. The mirror showed Dominic reflections that weren't his own. The mirror was an oddity, but an oddity that he would come to rely on. What the hell is this thing? Dominic had been browsing for things he could sell at his local thrift store, and the mirror had caught his eye. It stood out because the shop didn't usually put trash out with their junk. The mirror was fractured in 7 places, and it looked like someone had punched it in the center, sending spider cracks throughout the glass. At first, he thought it was some kind of joke mirror because when he looked into it, he saw 7 different reflections, and only 2 of them were him. The two that were him were on the top right and the bottom left. The left one showed a much younger Dominic as he shuddered on a metal frame bed in Clarence County Prison. At first, he thought it was just some inmate. Everyone kind of looked the same with a bald head and stripes on. But he would never forget that cell. It had the swastikas carved on the wall behind it. The legend that stated, "Cops are bastards," below it. And the picture of his then wife that he had stuck up there with toothpaste to add some color to the cell. It was him all right. But the one across from it was much more interesting. The top right showed Dominic picking up a painting in the art section. A painting with a price tag on it that read $2,000 per you. Dominic was no fool. He wanted to make sure this wasn't some kind of weird trick first. He'd grown up in gangs and living rough, and he knew a hustle when he saw one. It was an impressive hustle, to be sure, but it still smelled like a hustle to him. Dominic went to the little section they had for art, and sure enough, there was a picture of some women sitting on a balcony. Their faces looked scared as they grinned like corpses in their expensive dresses. The price tag on the front was not for $2,000, however, and was for a much more reasonable $10. Dominic thought it over, pulled out his phone as he snapped a picture, and looked to see what it was worth. He found a page for some artist named Roland Priest, and it just so happened that a lot of his paintings were going for big bucks since he had recently offed himself. A quick look took Dominic that this was, indeed, a depriest, and the going price for it was about $2,000 as of this afternoon. He picked up the painting and the mirror, deciding to take both home with him. "What you want that old ratty mirror for?" asked Mr. Druckle, looking at the broken glass without much interest. Clearly, he couldn't see what Dominique saw in it, and that might be for the better. "I like the frame," Dominique lied. "I think I might use it for something." Mr. Druckle looked at the painting in a weird way, but shrugged as he tapped it all up on his calculator. $10, he said, holding his wrinkly hand out with expectation. Mr. Druckle did business in cash. It did not truck with those little card machines. "And the mirror?" Dominique asked, not wanting to get scammed after the fact. "Take it," the old man said. "I can't sell a broken mirror, and the frame looks ugly anyway. If you want it, then by all means take it off my hands for me. Just don't cut yourself on the glass. I'd hate for you to try and sue me after I gave you such a great deal on it." Dominic nodded, thanking Mr. Druckle, as he left the little shop with the tinkle of the bell overhead. The painting he sold for the prophesied $2,000 to a scalper friend of his, and the mirror he hung in his bedroom. For a week, the mirror did little but show him going about mundane tasks, and Dominique began to wonder again if he had been had. The little inmate still stayed in his cell, sometimes going out for chow, but mostly just staying and looking sad. That tracked. Dominique had spent most of his bid being sad about one thing or another. Sad that he was stuck in prison for 5 years, at first, and then sad that his wife had left him towards the end. He tried to figure out what the other spots meant, but they were kind of a mystery to him. The middle two showed him awful things he didn't like to think about. He was a tough guy. He'd been in his share of scraps and seen people get killed in his lifetime, but this stuff was so much worse. People beating kids, people killing their wives, people hurting animals, and everything in between. The one next to it wasn't much better. He could see mothers tucking in starving kids, homeless people crying as they used the last of their money on a bottle of cheap alcohol, even little kids huddling together as they hid from someone. Some of what the mirror showed him was terrible, and some of it was as helpful as the painting had been. The top left panel showed a woman he knew all too well as she went about her day-to-day life. He would show her. She was his ex-wife. The bitch had divorced him while he was in prison and took most of his stuff while he was too incarcerated to do anything about it. She had even taken advantage of him while he was at his lowest, and for that he hated her. In that respect, he thought of that tab on his enemy panel and even wrote it on a post-it note as he stuck it to the wall. The mirror turned to be very useful, and when it came to avoiding her, proving itself one day just as he was about to leave. He was going out on a date, his hair freshly cut and his cologne not too heavy, when someone knocked at his door. His date was supposed to meet him at the restaurant, but he thought she might have decided to pick him up instead, and came out of his bathroom and towards the front of the house. He was walking past the mirror when he suddenly saw his ex standing outside a very familiar door. She did this sometimes, especially if she could Facebook stalk enough information to realize he was serious about someone. He hid out, letting her knock for a little while longer, but she finally got bored and left. Dominique was only a few minutes late for his date and used his little peephole often so he could avoid running into his ex. On the other hand, the bottom right panel showed him an older man he had never met before. Watching that guy was like watching the lifestyles of the rich and famous. He ate expensive food, drove expensive cars, wore expensive clothes, and went to bed with someone new every time Dominique noticed. He decided to leave that label blank for now, not really sure what he was seeing or how it would affect him. He found that on days when he didn't have anything better to do, Dominique was checking the mirror to see what he could see. He had definitely found some windfall from the mirror. The 3 scratch-offs he'd won kept his rent paid, but he was looking for another big score like the painting. In the top right, Dominique was back at the thrift store, but it was a different one today. Dominique watched as he picked up an expensive-looking fur coat, putting it on as he preened a little in front of the mirror. Then, he stuck his hand in the pocket and pulled out a diamond watch that, even to an untrained eye like Dominique's, looked expensive. The thrift store was known to him, a little second-hand store on Mulbank, and after checking out that his ex was still at her job, he decided to go see if lightning would strike twice. The thrift store wasn't crowded, and the coat was loud enough to be seen from the entrance. Dominique assumed it would reek of liquor and cheap cigars, looking like some wannabe pimp's prop. But the coat was in immaculate condition. The tag said it was a Vanderfur, a brand even Dominique was familiar with. He put it on and went to the mirror, preening a little as he'd seen himself do. The coat looked good. Very good, in fact. And it would go well with some of the shoes that Dominique had at home. As he stuck his hand in the pocket, however, it was time for the moment of truth. At first, there was nothing. Then, suddenly, his fingers touched the harsh surface of the expensive watch. He pulled out a Rolex with, honest to God, diamonds on the face. The whole thing gleamed obscenely, and Dominique longed to slide it on and feel the weight of it. This was the sort of thing that he had dreamed of as a kid. Driving around in a fancy car with a hot girl in the passenger seat, an expensive timepiece on his arm, and a primo coat. He would be the envy of anyone he knew, but as he turned to go, he heard someone at the counter asking about the coat. It was a Vanderfur. I donated it this morning, but my watch must have fallen out in the pocket. Please, I beg you, I need that watch back. It belonged to my father, and it has great sentimental value. Dominique intended to walk right on by without acknowledging the man. Finders keepers and all that. But as he caught sight of him in profile, he felt his breath whoosh out in a gasp. It was the man from his broken mirror. The guy who lived so lavishly. Dominique couldn't have said why, but suddenly, he was tapping the guy on the shoulder and holding out the expensive watch. I heard what you were saying, sir. I came to buy this coat and found the watch in the pocket. It's too nice for me anyway, he said, smiling as the joke fell flat. The older man's smile went from ear to ear. Oh, God. Thank you, young man. I can't believe how kind you are. Yeah, said Dominique. Neither can I. The man stood mooning over the watch for a few minutes as Dominique paid for his new coat. It was a little more than he strictly wanted to pay for a coat, but he found that he liked it, and it would help him remember a time when he'd been so generous. He started to think that maybe he could sell it for more than he'd pay for it, when someone stopped him on the sidewalk. The guy was running for him, asking him to wait as the watch threatened to slip off his wrist again. I owe you something at least for being so kind, he said, panting a little as he caught his breath. It's really okay, mister. You don't have to. I insist, the man said, taking a watch out of his suit coat that looked almost as impressive as the one he was wearing. My father bought me the watch you found when I was 18 and about to leave for college. This watch doesn't have nearly as much sentimental value, but I think it'll help you nonetheless. He put the watch on Dominique's hand and patted it warmly. I am in your debt, sir. Hopefully I can find a way to repay you someday. The watch was nice. Not as nice as the one he'd had, but still nice. It sold for about $1,300. And Dominique used the money to not only float him for a while, but also buy a much cheaper watch that still looked richer than anything he'd ever owned. He too wanted a reminder of that warm feeling he had felt when he'd done something nice for someone else. With the rent on his dingy apartment paid for the next few months, Dominique began spending a lot more time watching the mirror. He had decided that the panel with the rich man might be his greatest friend, if his ex-wife was to be his greatest enemy. The top and bottom corners were his future and past, and he used the former to enhance his own future often. The middle two were still a mystery to him, and he felt like that might make sense in time. The top panel, the one that took up the most space, however, made him more than a little uneasy. It was gray, the sky full of cracks as it swam like a puddle when you throw a rock into it. Dominique felt like he knew that sky, but he couldn't place it. He had never seen a gray sky like that in his life, except he had. He knew he had. He just didn't know when. He tried to look at that space as little as possible, but it just kept drawing his eye, making him want to take the mirror and throw it somewhere where it couldn't make him feel that way. That was usually how he got stuck looking at the middle two panels. Anything to take his mind off that gray sky full of cracks. The mirror kept showing him things and leading him to opportunities. But it wasn't until he saw one of the faces from the middle panel that he thought he knew its true purpose. He would later reflect on what leap of ego had led him to believe that he knew the purpose of something like this. He was at a Marcy's buying groceries one day when he saw a familiar face in line, and the true nature of that panel came to him. He had seen the woman before. Too many mouths to feed and not enough hours in the day to work to feed them. She was standing at the register, her card having been declined, deciding between a gallon of milk and a box of diapers, to diaper the baby or have milk for the other 4. "Here," Dominique said, paying the cashier the remainder from his own wallet. He had no idea why he had been moved to help, but it made him feel so good to do so. The woman thanked him profusely, almost to an embarrassing degree, but Dominique told her not to worry about it. She could pay him back if she felt strongly about it, but there was a little more to get her through the week if she needed it. The woman cried as she tried to refuse him, but the money went into her purse regardless, and Dominique smiled as he watched her go. After that, he began using his own money to help others more often. The mirror helped him invest in windfalls, helped him change his life for the better, and as he grew, so too did his altruism. Suddenly, he was no longer giving money to single mothers or tipping bills into the homeless people's cups, but he was helping the city open shelters, providing programs with startup capital so they could offer meals to people in need, and changing the poverty-stricken neighborhood he lived in for the better. That was how he reconnected with the man from the thrift store, and it was a meeting that would change his life forever. The mirror had shown him that today he would meet someone who would change his life, but he had never expected it to be the man who had begun his charity. As he gave the keynote speech, he could see an ocean of faces that had once looked hopelessly out of the mirror at him. He had given them the hope he now saw there, and the feeling made him tingle. He had always wanted to be someone who could help others, even as he struggled to help himself. He had never realized it before. He had something worthwhile to give now, and he was on top of the world. As he sat ladling punch into a plastic cup, he heard a voice he hadn't heard in 4 years. "Looks like you've come a long way since the thrift store. I almost didn't recognize you until you started to speak up there." Dominique turned, and there was a man who had given him the watch. He extended a hand. "We've never been formally introduced. I'm David Rothschild, philanthropist and tech mogul." Dominique Fraser, it's nice to see you again." And it was. The two of them talked for the rest of the afternoon, and when they parted ways at sunset, the two were already working on plans for a venture together. Dominique had given him some stock advice, something the mirror had shown him the day before, and the two parted with promises that they would get together again very soon. Dominique returned to his apartment, the same dingy one-bedroom he had lived in for years, wanting to see what the future had in store, now that he had found a man like David to partner with. Instead of grand business ventures and philanthropic outreach, however, he was greeted with himself stabbing his new friend to death. Dominique stared at the mirror for a moment, unsure of what he was seeing. This couldn't be his future. Why would he do such a thing? He had a lot of respect for David and couldn't imagine why he would hurt him. It had to be a fluke, a trick of the light, but every time he came back to the mirror, it showed him the same thing. His knife red with David's blood and David laying on the floor of his tiny apartment. It never changed. It never wavered. And Dominique decided that enough was enough where the mirror was concerned. He put it in the hall closet, shutting it and its proposed future away for good. At least, he hoped so. He spent a lot of time with David in the coming months. The two did a lot of good for the community, for many communities, and Dominique found himself living a part of that lifestyle he had only seen through the mirror. Jet setting, eating lavish meals, living the sort of life he had always dreamed about. And with a friend like David Rothschild, he could live that life with an ease he had never known. Dominique was the happiest he had ever been. Or he would have been if not for the dreams. In the dreams, he always saw himself standing over David's corpse as he bled out onto his tacky carpet. In the dreams, he could hear the sirens approaching as he stood over the man like a conquering hero. In the dreams, Dominique knew that his life as he knew it was about to come to an end. It started very subtly. Dominique began spending time at home instead of with David. He was busy with other projects. He needed to give some attention to his other charities. He needed to reconnect with his roots and remember the people who needed him. These were all excuses he gave to his new friend. But in reality, Dominique had begun to resent his business partner. David Rothschild, who had everything except a criminal record and a checkered past. The more he thought about it, the more he wondered if David was doing this to mess him up. Did he know that Dominique was supposed to kill him? Was this his way of stealing his happiness? Just like that bitch of his ex-wife. Were they in this together? Was she so unhappy with this success that she would stoop to this to make him miserable? He neglected his work, neglected the things that had brought him joy, and spent all this time in his apartment, begging the mirror to show him anything but the bloody end to his happiness. When the knock on his door came, Dominique realized that he hadn't left his apartment in weeks. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing the day before. Or was it the week before? Anyway, they clung to him sweatily, and the smell from his pants made him think that he might have soiled himself. Now that he was back from his trance, he wondered when the last time he had eaten was. His stomach growled angrily, and he had gotten up to go to the kitchen when he heard the knock again. "Dominique, are you there? Your secretary said I could find you here. Are you home?" David again. Dominique got up, walked angrily to the door. He would send him away. Better to lose a friend than lose his life. He liked David a lot. He was a good friend, but he liked being a free man more. He had wasted 5 years in prison, and he would be damned if he'd go back. He didn't care what some mirror said. He wasn't going to let anything jeopardize his future. "Go away. I don't want to talk to you." But why? What did I do to you?" Dominique closed his eyes, trying not to let the rage that was building behind them out. What had he done? Like he didn't know. He was only stealing his life from him. "I don't owe you an explanation. Please, just leave. I don't want to hurt you." "I'm not leaving until you tell me why you're acting talking like this? I'll stand here all night if I have to. I just want to see what's going on with you. I'm worried, Dominique. I'm worried about you. Dominique didn't remember opening the door, but suddenly the men were face to face. Some of the neighbors were peeking out of their apartments, trying to see what was going on. Dominique just knew they would have something to talk about tomorrow, and he shuddered to think what sort of stories they might weave. A lover's quarrel. Maybe David had stolen Dominique's girlfriend. Maybe they had stolen money from each other. Who was to say? And all of it would likely paint Dominique the worst for it. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. Can't you just respect my wishes? And something's going on here. David cut over him. You're not acting like yourself. Did someone say something to you? Did you hear something? There's a lot of rumors going around about me. It's the same with most rich guys in our circles. I just don't know why you're so... Dominique was sick of hearing it and shut him up the only way he knew how. David's tooth flew down the hallway when he hit him, and suddenly the two men were rolling around the floor and throwing punches. It was the kind of ugly fighting you see in desperate people, and as it rolled into his apartment, Dominique realized he couldn't pummel David into submission. Despite being a decade older than him, the man was in better physical shape than he had a prayer of being. As David rained blows down on him, Dominique sent his hand searching for something to defend himself with. The knife was something he had lost years ago. A steak knife that had tumbled from his plate and rolled under the couch forever. But when his fingers locked onto it, he knew what to do with it. Before he knew what was happening, he was standing over David, the other having been stabbed more than a dozen times. The sirens were coming, and as Dominique let the knife slip from his numb fingers, he realized they had taken it from him anyway. His life, for better or for worse, was over now. Well, not all of it. There was still a little bit more left. The trial had been short. They had found him in the apartment with the murder weapon and the victim, his prints all over both. There had been witnesses to see the two fighting, and it seemed an open and shut case. The Rothschilds found a slew of witnesses willing to testify that Dominique had been the aggressor, and with his checkered past, all his lawyer could do was to get him life. It had been a sham of a trial, and Dominique didn't know why the court bothered with it. They wanted him to be guilty. The mirror had told him as much, and now his life was over. The guards at Clarence County smiled knowingly when they saw him get off the bus. Welcome home, that smile seemed to say. And didn't we tell you you'd be back? As he lay on the floor of his old cell, the cell they'd seemed to think it was so funny to put him back in, he realized what the gray sky had been showing him all along. As he lay on the filthy floor and looked at the cracks in the ceiling, he finally realized why they had looked so familiar. This was his life now. His life and his death. And he wondered how long he would have to look at these cracks in this pitiable concrete before someone came along and put him out of his misery. If the mirror knew, it certainly wasn't telling anyone. And that, dear listeners, is the end of a creepy throng of scary stories. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you're awake and listening, I hope you've enjoyed this collection of stories. Until next time, I'll read to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night.